Family Matters was truly an awesome show and a great part of my childhood. We'll talk about it in just a second here. Family Matters was a lot of different things. It was funny, it was dramatic, it was emotional, but at the end of the day, it was entertaining. I grew up with the show in the late 90s, early 2000s when it was in syndication. I wasn't able to catch either of its ABC or CBS runs, but I was able to catch it in syndication, and it felt like a new show to me. And I'll never forget just how in awe I was at the beauty of the set design, the wonderful music, the beautiful opening theme and sequence, just the characterizations of the Winslow family and Steve Urkel. Almost everything felt right about this show. There wasn't a whole lot that felt wrong, despite a lot of today's criticisms retroactively of the show. This was a feel-good show if there ever was one. This was a show that made you feel good about what it means to be a family. And it's a show all about what it means to be a family. And that's one of the reasons why I think it's a tremendous show, is because it elevates an element of American and world culture that needs to be elevated, which is love of the family. Now, I fully understand that the family isn't always as idealistic as it's portrayed in sitcoms. One of the biggest things about sitcoms is that it's largely just an ideal to strive by. It's not incredibly realistic. And a lot of people criticize these shows for this because they feel like they shouldn't be leading people astray with views of the family. But I don't see it as deceptive. I see it as making an ideal to strive by. People who liked Family Matters wanted to be a part of a family like the Winslows if they didn't have one. They wanted to start a family like the Winslows if they didn't have one. They wanted to grow up to have kids that were like the Winslow kids, to be able to pass life lessons and wisdom down to, you know? It was idealistic. It wasn't the most realistic depiction of a given family, but it didn't need to be because it stood out on its own with good storytelling and characterization, and it really moved people, both comedically and dramatically. Man, it did so much right. I'm struggling to find ways to describe what it did right. I'll try to give a couple of examples of specific episodes. Ones that stood out to me were the ones wherever Steve accidentally screwed something up and the Winslows just treated him with disrespect because of it. At the end of those episodes, they ended up forgiving Steve for what he did. Steve Urkel was not a malicious person, he was just clumsy and goofy. He was a stereotypical geek of the time, and a lot of times that came across as annoying and frustrating in the real world and on TV. And a lot of people criticize this because he was often treated so poorly both by kids at school and by the Winslows. It seemed like Steve could never really catch a break. But the thing that I noticed about the show was that it was not glorifying the nerd stereotype. It was pushing against it. It was making you feel a certain way about the nerd stereotype, feeling bad for somebody who clearly had a good heart and good intentions. But people couldn't see past his physical flaws and his nerdy tendencies. But oftentimes they learned to appreciate him for who he was. Some of the bullies at school didn't, but the Winslows did. The series has a really good ending where Steve effectively becomes officially a part of the Winslow family. And Carl even says he's proud of him. The show had been building up to that moment for years, and it was really satisfying when it happened. So, I think the portrayal of the nerd isn't really offensive. It's just really realistic. For people who say that the show isn't realistic, it's one of the most realistic elements, especially at the time. Now, of course, times have changed and treatment of people have changed to a degree. But there's always going to be social stigma against different peoples. And this show did a good job of kind of tearing that down in a way that wasn't preachy, but felt realistic and felt agreeable. They dealt with several different issues. They dealt with racism. I think at one time they dealt with drug use. They dealt with violence several times. They dealt with pride and ego and disobedience to parents and authority figures. They dealt with all of the different things that are coming of age. This was largely a coming-of-age story, and it told most of those stories fairly well. Obviously, there were episodes that weren't that great. Everybody knows of one. But most people didn't care because for every bad episode, there was a really funny and good one. You just skip the ones you didn't like with any show. No show is perfect. And I'm not here to claim that Family Matters is a perfect, flawless show. No sitcom or show is. But it's one of the best examples of a 90s sitcom in terms of its writing, its characterizations, its set design, its soundtrack. It does so much right, and it makes you feel good. There's not a lot of feel-good television left in America. It feels like the age of Family Matters and TGIF is long since gone. And it's very unfortunate to me. I weep for the loss of the moral values in America. I really do. Not to say that nobody practices a lot of the values that were taught in this show, because many of us were raised with them. But it doesn't seem to be the norm anymore, as more people are more self-absorbed and selfish. A lot of families have been divided, and a lot of sitcoms dealt with the divided families of the 80s and 90s. You had Full House, where the wife unfortunately died, so the three guys had to raise the three girls. You dealt with a lot of divorced families in sitcoms, but they still came together for the sake of the kids, and oftentimes a new mother or father would come into the picture and the family became whole again. And they dealt with the difficulties of that, the difficulties of step-siblings and step-parents. But they emphasized that a family can still be a family as long as they love each other. That's a value that people can get behind. But unfortunately, we don't see a lot of that today because it's considered worn out and dated and too stereotypical. It's often more criticized than anything else. But these are beloved shows. This is one of the most beloved sitcoms of all time. It's still running today, at least in syndication. Its initial run ended in the 90s, but for many people it'll feel brand new because they haven't seen it. And that's why I want to emphasize that people really should be exposing their kids to Family Matters. They're going to walk away with some really core values by watching this show, some really good life lessons. You can watch it through with them. I really think that it's a fantastic series. And I was raised on it, and I turned out pretty okay. It's a very solid show. No, I said solid, not... never mind. Bad joke. Anyways, let me know what you think of Family Matters down in the comments below. Do you have any fond memories of the series? Do you have any family memories of the series? Do you think it's a great show? Do you think it's an overrated show? What are your thoughts on it? I'm curious. Leave them in the comments below. Thank you very much for watching. This has been Super Koopa TV. Remember, Hollywood doesn't respect you. God bless. Have a good one. Peace.